Some doors are locked to keep danger out. The worst ones are locked to keep destiny in. I woke to the faint scent of cedar and rain, staring at a ceiling so high it disappeared into soft morning shadows. For a long moment, I couldn't remember where I was. My heartbeat slowed just enough for the silence to become unsettling. It wasn't the comforting silence of my tiny apartment where the old refrigerator hummed every few minutes and traffic drifted through cracked windows. This silence was controlled. Expensive. Almost rehearsed. I pushed myself upright, wincing as a dull ache settled behind my temples. The bed beneath me was impossibly soft, covered in crisp white sheets that looked like they had never been slept in before last night. A pale gray blanket rested neatly across my legs as though someone had tucked me in after I lost consciousness. That realization sent a chill through me. I wasn't alone when I'd fallen asleep. I glanced around the enormous bedroom. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked acres of perfectly trimmed gardens glistening beneath the morning rain. Beyond them stood black iron gates stretching farther than I could see, disappearing into rows of towering oak trees. Whoever owned this place didn't simply have money. They had a world built around them. My pulse quickened. I slid carefully from the bed and crossed the polished hardwood floor. Even barefoot, I hesitated before touching the brass handle. It turned easily. The hallway outside looked more like an art museum than a home. Oil paintings lined cream-colored walls beneath crystal chandeliers that reflected the pale morning light. Every surface gleamed with impossible perfection. Somewhere in the distance, I heard footsteps. Measured. Unhurried. Professional. Instinct told me not to wait. I hurried toward the grand staircase, hoping to find an exit before anyone noticed I was awake. Halfway down, I froze. Two men in tailored black suits stood near the front doors, speaking quietly through tiny earpieces. Neither looked surprised to see me. One simply offered a polite nod. "Good morning, Miss Bennett." My stomach tightened. "How do you know my name?" He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped aside with calm precision, revealing the massive oak doors behind him. Relief flooded through me. I reached for the handle and pulled with all my strength. Nothing. I tried again. Still nothing. Locked. "Please," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. "I need to leave." The second man spoke without raising his voice. "I'm afraid that's not possible." Every nerve in my body screamed. "I don't belong here." Neither man moved. Neither looked threatening. Somehow that frightened me even more. They acted like this conversation had already happened 100 times before. Then another voice drifted across the marble foyer. Calm. Deep. Unhurried. "She's right." I turned. He stood at the far end of the hall beside a window overlooking the rain, one hand resting in the pocket of a charcoal suit tailored so perfectly it seemed made for him alone. Dark hair framed a face that looked carved from stone, but it was his gray-blue eyes that held me still. They weren't cold. They were tired. Tired in the way only someone carrying too much responsibility could be. He studied me for several silent seconds before walking closer. Every person in the room instinctively stepped back to give him space. No introductions were necessary. Authority surrounded him long before he spoke. When he finally stopped a few feet away, his expression remained unreadable. "You weren't meant for this mansion," he said quietly. Confusion overtook my fear. "Then let me go." His gaze shifted briefly toward the rain beyond the locked doors before returning to mine. "I would," he answered. "But the moment you saved my life last night, someone else decided you should never make it home." I stared at him, searching his face for some sign that this was all an elaborate misunderstanding, but the calm certainty in his expression only made my chest tighten. Nobody smiled. Nobody laughed. Even the rain outside seemed quieter, tapping gently against the towering windows as though the entire estate was waiting for my next move. "I do not understand," I whispered. "I helped a stranger on the side of the road. That is all." Damien Romano nodded once, almost thoughtfully. Exactly. His answer made even less sense than the silence surrounding it. You stopped when everyone else kept driving. You called for medical help. You stayed until my security team arrived. That single decision changed everything. I folded my arms tightly across my chest, more to steady myself than to appear brave. Then thank you is enough. I can go home now. His eyes drifted toward the locked front doors again. If gratitude were the only thing involved, you would already be there. I followed his gaze before looking back at him. Who are you? A faint breath escaped his lips, almost resembling a tired laugh. Someone whose name creates problems for people who know it. Before I could answer, another man entered the foyer carrying a tablet. His gray hair and perfectly tailored navy suit made him look more like a distinguished attorney than someone working inside a heavily guarded estate. Sir, he said quietly. Everything has been confirmed. Damien accepted the tablet without looking away from me. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly as he scanned the screen. Whatever he read seemed to confirm what he had already expected. He handed it back without another word. The older gentleman offered me a sympathetic smile. Miss Bennet, my name is Arthur. I oversee the household. Breakfast has been prepared whenever you feel ready. I blinked. Breakfast? My voice cracked with disbelief. You think I can eat right now? Arthur's smile never faded. Most people find it easier to think on a full stomach. I almost laughed, but nothing about the situation felt funny. I have to call my sister. My hand immediately reached into the pocket of my jeans. Empty. Panic rushed through me. I checked my jacket. Nothing. Where is my phone? Arthur answered gently. It was damaged in the rain last night. A replacement is already being arranged. You replaced my phone? I looked between the two men, completely overwhelmed. You do not even know what kind I had. Damien finally spoke again. You had an older model with a cracked blue case. My breath caught. How do you know that? Because you dropped it while trying to keep me awake. The memory flickered through my mind like scattered pieces of broken glass. Rain pouring across the empty highway. Headlights reflecting off soaked pavement. A man leaning against the guardrail, struggling to stay conscious while insisting he was fine. Me refusing to leave until help arrived. I remembered the black SUVs appearing from nowhere. Men rushing toward us. Someone thanking me before everything became blurry. I thought. I swallowed hard. I thought you were just another driver. I know. His voice softened enough that I almost missed it. That is why you are standing here instead of somewhere much worse. My pulse quickened again. You keep saying someone wants to find me. Why? Damien took a slow step toward the window, watching droplets race down the glass. Because people rarely believe in accidents. He paused before looking back at me. They will assume you know something valuable. But I do not know anything. Neither do I, he admitted quietly. The problem is that they will not ask before making their own conclusions. I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell him this belonged in some crime novel, not in my ordinary life. Yet every instinct told me he was not exaggerating. The fear in his eyes was too controlled to be fake. Then a distant engine echoed beyond the gates. One of the security officers touched his earpiece and immediately straightened. Damien noticed before anyone spoke. His expression hardened with quiet resolve. It seems, he said, his voice almost a whisper, our time to explain everything just became much shorter than I hoped. The low growl of engines rolled across the estate before fading into silence, leaving only the steady rhythm of rain against the windows. Every member of the security team became noticeably more alert without appearing rushed. They did not shout. They did not panic. They simply moved with practiced precision, exchanging brief glances that seemed to communicate entire conversations. I watched them in disbelief. This was not how ordinary people reacted to unexpected visitors. This was preparation born from experience. Damien remained perfectly still. His shoulders were relaxed, yet the room somehow felt heavier around him. Arthur quietly accepted another message through his earpiece before stepping closer. The outer checkpoint confirmed the delivery convoy, sir. Everything matches the schedule. Damien gave a small nod. Good. I released a breath I had not realized I was holding. So there is no emergency? He looked at me for a moment before answering. Not this time. My knees suddenly felt weak from the rush of relief. You could have told me that. A faint smile appeared for the first time, so brief I almost questioned whether I had imagined it. You needed to see how quickly this house changes when uncertainty appears. I frowned. Why? Because if you stay here for even a few days, you will understand that nothing inside these walls happens by accident. Arthur gestured politely toward an open set of double doors. Miss Bennet, breakfast is waiting. You have had a difficult night. Every sensible part of me wanted to refuse. Another part reminded me I had not eaten since yesterday afternoon. Hunger eventually defeated pride. I followed Arthur through a wide dining room where sunlight filtered through tall windows, reflecting off polished silver and fresh white flowers arranged along a table large enough to seat 20 people. Only 2 places were set. Damien entered moments later, taking the chair across from me without ceremony. There were no servants hovering behind him. No dramatic speeches. Just fresh coffee, warm biscuits, scrambled eggs, fruit, and complete silence. I looked down at the porcelain plate in front of me. This feels strange. Damien poured coffee into his cup. Because you expected someone like me to live differently? I hesitated before answering honestly. I expected someone like you to be impossible to talk to. You still might be right. His dry response caught me off guard. Despite myself, I smiled for less than a second before remembering where I was. Arthur quietly excused himself, leaving us alone. I studied Damien more carefully than before. Up close, the expensive suit and confident posture were obvious, but so were the shadows beneath his eyes. He looked like a man who had forgotten what uninterrupted sleep felt like. Did you sleep at all? I asked before thinking. He paused with his coffee halfway to his lips. Why would you ask that? Because you look exhausted. He stared at me with genuine surprise, as though nobody had asked him that question in years. People usually notice other things first. Like what? The house. The security. The reputation. I lowered my eyes to my plate. I noticed those too. Another silence settled between us, but this one felt different. Less hostile. More uncertain. As I reached for my coffee, my gaze drifted toward the enormous windows overlooking the gardens. Several groundskeepers were carefully replanting flowers damaged by last night's storm. One older gardener struggled to lift a heavy stone planter by himself. Without thinking, I stood. Excuse me. Damien watched as I walked onto the covered terrace before calling gently to the gardener. Together we managed to slide the planter safely into place. The older man smiled with grateful eyes and thanked me more than once before returning to his work. When I stepped back inside, I found every security guard quietly watching. Arthur looked strangely pleased. Damien simply studied me in silence. What? I asked. He leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful rather than suspicious. Most people who arrive here spend their first morning looking for a way out. He glanced toward the smiling gardener outside before meeting my eyes again. You looked for someone who needed help instead. For the rest of the morning, I could not stop thinking about what Damien had said. Most people looked for a way out. The truth was, I wanted one too. I simply could not ignore someone struggling right in front of me. My mother used to say kindness was a habit, not a decision. You either carried it everywhere or nowhere at all. I had never questioned that until I found myself inside a place where every hallway echoed with quiet discipline and every person seemed to move according to invisible rules. Arthur offered to show me around the estate, explaining that remaining in one room all day would only make me more anxious. He was right. We walked through long corridors lined with family portraits that stretched back generations. Every painting carried the same unmistakable confidence. Men and women dressed in elegant clothing, standing beside marble columns or overlooking vineyards, each expression carefully composed. "Your family has lived here for a long time," I said. Arthur smiled politely. "This house has witnessed many seasons." It was a careful answer, revealing almost nothing. We continued past a library larger than the public one near my apartment, a music room with a grand piano that looked untouched, and a sunlit conservatory overflowing with orchids. The mansion felt less like a home and more like a world that had slowly built itself over decades. Yet despite all its beauty, something was missing. Laughter. The kind that came without permission. As we reached the second-floor balcony overlooking the entrance hall, voices drifted upward from below. Damien had returned from somewhere inside the West Wing. A younger man in a navy suit handed him several folders while speaking quietly. Damien listened without interrupting, occasionally asking short questions before signing a document and returning it. Every person around him seemed to relax only after receiving his approval. He never raised his voice. He never demanded attention. Somehow he never needed to. "Does everyone trust him that much?" I asked. Arthur followed my gaze. "Trust is earned over many years." "They are not afraid?" Arthur considered the question carefully. "Respect and fear often arrive together. The fortunate leaders eventually separate the two." Before I could ask what he meant, Damien looked up. For a brief second our eyes met across the open foyer. He gave the slightest nod before returning to his conversation. It was strangely ordinary. Almost as if acknowledging me had become natural. Arthur excused himself to answer a phone call, leaving me alone beside the balcony. Curious, I wandered toward another hallway where several office doors stood partially open. I was about to turn back when I heard my own name. I froze without meaning to listen. "Claire Bennett," one voice said. Background complete. 24 years old. Nursing student. Part-time work at Saint and Community Clinic. No criminal history. No unusual financial activity. Student loans. Small apartment. Volunteers twice a month at the neighborhood food pantry. There was a brief silence before Damien answered. "Friends?" "A few close ones. Mostly co-workers. No connection to organized crime, political groups, or corporate competitors." Another pause followed. "Family?" "One older sister in Denver. Parents passed away several years ago." My chest tightened. They knew everything. Every ordinary detail of my life had somehow been gathered into a neat report. I should have felt violated. Instead, I felt unexpectedly small. Compared to this enormous estate and the powerful man quietly reading the file, my entire world fit inside a few pages. Then Damien spoke again, his voice lower than before. "She stopped to help someone she believed was a stranger. That tells me more than any report ever could." The room fell silent. I stepped backward before anyone noticed I had overheard. My heart pounded as I returned to the hallway, trying to process what I had just heard. For the first time since waking inside the mansion, I realized Damien was not investigating me because he distrusted me. He was searching desperately for one thing he still could not find. A reason why someone as ordinary as me had suddenly become part of his extraordinary life. That afternoon, I made up my mind. I appreciated everything Damien had done, but gratitude could not become a prison. I needed my own clothes, my classes, my ordinary life with overdue bills and crowded grocery stores. I needed to hear my sister's voice instead of wondering whether she believed I had disappeared. Arthur found me standing beside the front windows, watching sunlight finally break through the clouds after nearly 24 hours of rain. "You look determined," he observed with a knowing smile. "I am leaving." He folded his hands calmly. "Have you spoken with Mr. Romano?" I should not need permission to go home. Arthur studied me for a moment before nodding. That is a fair point. 10 minutes later, Damien entered the library where I was waiting. He looked as composed as always, though the loosened tie beneath his suit jacket suggested he had been working non-stop since breakfast. He closed the door quietly behind him. Arthur said you wanted to speak with me. I am going home. I forced myself to hold his gaze. Thank you for protecting me. Thank you for helping me after last night. But I cannot stay here. He remained silent long enough that I wondered whether he had heard me. Finally, he walked toward one of the tall windows overlooking the circular driveway. How long do you think it takes for rumors to spread? The question caught me off guard. I do not know. Less than an hour. He looked outside before continuing. Facts travel slowly. Assumptions move at remarkable speed. I shook my head. That still does not explain why I cannot leave. He turned toward me. Because someone may already believe you know things that you do not. I crossed my arms. Then let me decide whether that risk is worth taking. A faint expression of frustration crossed his face for the first time. Claire, if this affected only me, I would hand you your keys myself. Then do it. The room became very quiet. After several long seconds, Damien reached into his jacket pocket and removed a small leather key holder. He placed it on the polished desk between us. Your car has been serviced. The fuel tank is full. I blinked. You are serious? I told you from the beginning. I do not want to keep you here. My heart lifted with cautious relief. Maybe I had judged him too quickly. Maybe this strange chapter was finally ending. Arthur escorted me to the front entrance while another employee handed me a new phone with all my contacts transferred. The kindness only made leaving more difficult than I expected. As the massive front doors opened, fresh autumn air rushed inside carrying the scent of wet earth and pine trees. My little sedan waited at the bottom of the stone steps exactly where Damien had promised. I smiled despite everything. Thank you. Arthur returned the smile with surprising sadness. Please drive carefully. I walked down the wide staircase, unlocked my car, and climbed behind the wheel. The familiar fabric seats instantly made me feel like myself again. I started the engine and slowly drove toward the enormous front gates. The guards standing nearby exchanged quick glances before one of them pressed a button. The iron gates began to swing open. Freedom was less than 50 yards away. Then my new phone rang. The unfamiliar number almost made me ignore it, but something told me to answer. Hello? A calm male voice spoke immediately. Miss Bennett? Yes. Please do not continue driving. Every muscle in my body tensed. Who is this? There was a brief pause before the stranger answered with unsettling politeness. Someone who would very much like to ask you about the man whose house you are leaving. My foot instinctively pressed the brake. In the rearview mirror, I saw Damien step onto the front porch, his eyes fixed on my car as though he already knew exactly why I had stopped. I could not speak. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel as the unfamiliar voice remained perfectly calm on the other end of the line. There was no anger. No urgency. Somehow that made every word more unsettling. You have been through enough confusion for one day, Miss Bennett, the man continued. We simply wish to have a conversation. I swallowed hard. I think you have the wrong number. No, he replied politely. We have exactly the right one. Before I could answer, the call ended. The silence inside my car became deafening. My heartbeat filled every corner of the cabin. I stared at the phone for another few seconds before looking toward the open gates ahead of me. Freedom was still there, less than 50 yards away, yet it suddenly felt much farther. A light knock on my driver's side window made me jump. Damien stood outside with one hand resting casually in his pocket. His expression revealed nothing, but his eyes immediately searched my face. I lowered the window. Someone called me, I admitted quietly. He nodded once, as though the news confirmed something he had expected all along. What did they say? They knew my name. They knew I was leaving your house. I watched his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. Did they threaten you? No. I shook my head. That is what scares me. They sounded pleasant. Damien looked toward the open gates before meeting my eyes again. People rarely reveal their intentions during the first conversation. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, I turned off the engine. I guess I am not leaving today. A small breath escaped him. It was not relief exactly. More like the release of a weight he had been carrying since sunrise. Thank you, he said softly. Do not thank me. I climbed out of the car, still holding the phone. I am only making the decision that lets me sleep tonight. As we walked back toward the mansion, the afternoon sunlight spread across the stone courtyard, making the estate seem far less intimidating than it had that morning. Gardeners trimmed hedges while kitchen staff carried baskets of fresh vegetables toward a side entrance. For the first time, I noticed people living ordinary lives inside this extraordinary place. Arthur greeted us with the warm smile of someone who had quietly believed I would return. Welcome back, Miss Bennet. I laughed despite myself. I was gone for less than 5 minutes. Sometimes 5 minutes changes everything, he replied. Later that afternoon, unable to sit still any longer, I wandered toward the rear gardens. Near the greenhouse, I found the elderly gardener I had helped earlier trying to organize flower pots before the evening breeze arrived. Need another pair of hands? I asked. His weathered face brightened instantly. Only if you do not mind getting your shoes dirty. I smiled. I have never been very good at keeping shoes clean. For the next hour, we worked side by side, arranging pots, watering young plants, and tying climbing roses to wooden supports. He introduced himself as Samuel and proudly explained that he had cared for these gardens for almost 30 years. Every flower had a story. Every tree had been planted to celebrate a birthday, an anniversary, or a new beginning. Listening to him made the mansion feel less like a fortress and more like a place where memories quietly collected. As the sun drifted lower, Samuel suddenly rubbed his shoulder and winced. Too much lifting today, he admitted with an embarrassed smile. Old bones have opinions now. Without thinking, I guided him toward a nearby bench. Stay still for a second. I gently checked his shoulder the same way I had practiced countless times during clinical training. The muscles are simply overworked. You need rest more than stubbornness. He laughed warmly. You sound exactly like my late wife. Neither of us noticed Damien standing several yards away beneath the shade of an old oak tree until Samuel smiled toward him. She reminds this house how to breathe, sir. Damien did not answer immediately. His eyes rested on the quiet scene before him, on an ordinary conversation between two ordinary people. When he finally spoke, his voice carried across the garden with unexpected honesty. I was beginning to think this house had forgotten how. That evening, the mansion felt different. The polished hallways were still quiet, the crystal chandeliers still reflected warm golden light across the marble floors, but something invisible had shifted. Staff members smiled a little more often. Conversations lingered a few seconds longer before returning to work. Even Samuel waved enthusiastically when he saw me through the kitchen window carrying another tray of herbs inside. I had only been there 2 days, yet it somehow felt as though everyone had silently agreed to pretend I belonged. I was helping one of the cooks arrange fresh vegetables when Arthur appeared in the doorway. Miss Bennet, Mr. Romano would like to know if you would join him for dinner. I looked up in surprise. Just the two of us? Arthur nodded. He specifically requested that. I almost refused out of instinct. Then I remembered the phone call. The locked gates. The strange life that had suddenly become mine. If I was going to remain here for now, perhaps I should finally understand the man responsible for all of it. 20 minutes later, I entered the smaller dining room instead of the enormous formal hall. The room overlooked the western gardens where the last colors of sunset stretched across the sky. A single table had been prepared near the windows. No endless display of luxury. No crowd of assistants. Just two place settings, soft piano music drifting from hidden speakers, and Damien already waiting with a glass of sparkling water in front of him. He stood as I entered. "Thank you for coming." I was curious, I admitted honestly. That is usually how important conversations begin. I sat across from him, smoothing the sleeves of the borrowed sweater Arthur had arranged for me earlier. The chef quietly served roasted chicken, fresh vegetables, warm bread, and homemade soup before disappearing without interrupting the silence. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. It was strangely comfortable. Finally, I looked around the elegant room. "Does anyone ever eat here besides you?" Damien smiled faintly. "Almost never." "Then why have such a beautiful room?" He considered the question before answering. "It was built for a family." He glanced toward the empty chairs surrounding us. "Some plans take longer than expected." There was no bitterness in his voice. Only quiet acceptance. I broke a piece of bread and dipped it into the soup. "You know, where I grew up, dinner meant everyone talking over each other." His expression became curious. "Who usually won?" I laughed softly. "Nobody." That was the point. For the first time I heard Damien laugh too. It was brief and low, almost unfamiliar to him, but undeniably genuine. The sound surprised both of us. He looked down at his plate as though wondering when he had last done that. "Arthur once told me this house used to be louder," he admitted. "Before?" I asked gently. He nodded without explaining further. I did not press him. Instead, I asked, "What did you want to be when you were a kid?" His fork stopped halfway to his plate. "No one has asked me that in a very long time. I am asking now." He leaned back slightly, looking through the windows toward the darkening gardens. "An architect." I blinked. "Really?" I liked drawing buildings. His smile carried a trace of nostalgia. I believed homes could change the people living inside them. I glanced around the room again. Maybe they still can. Our eyes met across the table. Neither of us looked away immediately. The silence between us no longer felt uncomfortable. It felt thoughtful. Almost peaceful. Just as Arthur entered carrying dessert, a small ceramic plate slipped from another employee's hands near the doorway and shattered against the marble floor. The young server immediately froze, her face turning pale. "I am so sorry," she whispered, clearly expecting the worst. Every movement in the room stopped. The young woman could barely breathe as she stared at the broken pieces scattered around her feet. Damien calmly folded his napkin and stood. He walked over without raising his voice or showing the slightest hint of anger. Then he crouched beside the frightened employee, picked up the largest piece himself, and smiled gently. "Plates are replaceable," he said. "People are not. Please make sure you are not hurt." The young woman looked at him with watery eyes before quietly thanking him. As she walked away, I realized something that no rumor, no newspaper headline, and no whispered story could have prepared me for. The most surprising thing about the man everyone feared was not his power. It was the remarkable care with which he chose to use it. I slept better that night than I expected. Maybe it was because the fear had finally given way to exhaustion, or maybe it was because the mansion no longer felt like a place where I was being watched every second. The following morning, sunlight poured through the bedroom windows instead of rain, painting long golden lines across the hardwood floor. For the first time since arriving, I opened the curtains without wondering what waited outside. The gardens were already alive with movement. Samuel was directing two younger gardeners while birds circled above the fountain in the center courtyard. Everything looked peaceful enough to make me question whether the phone call had even happened. After breakfast, I wandered through the West Wing searching for Arthur. Instead, I found a small sitting room I had somehow missed before. Children's books filled one wall from floor to ceiling. Colored pencils rested neatly inside glass jars. A half-finished jigsaw puzzle sat on a coffee table beside several stuffed animals that looked carefully arranged rather than abandoned. The room felt warm in a way the rest of the mansion did not. Someone had loved this place enough to protect it from time. I was studying a watercolor painting of a lighthouse when I heard soft footsteps behind me. Arthur smiled as though he had expected to find me there. Not many guests discover this room. Whose is it? His expression softened. It belongs to every child who has ever needed it. I turned toward him, confused. I thought only the staff lived here. Arthur motioned for me to follow him through a side hallway leading toward the rear courtyard. Beyond the greenhouse stood another building connected to the estate by a covered stone walkway. It looked less like part of a private mansion and more like a cheerful community center, with bright flower boxes beneath every window and colorful wind chimes dancing in the breeze. Children's laughter floated through the open doors. I stopped walking. "What is this?" Arthur answered with quiet pride. "A learning center." We stepped inside, and I immediately noticed shelves filled with books, art supplies, musical instruments, and comfortable reading corners. About a dozen children sat around large tables painting autumn leaves while two teachers helped them finish school projects. Several looked up and waved as though visitors were perfectly normal. One little girl hurried over holding a drawing of a golden retriever. "Do you like dogs?" she asked. I smiled. "Very much." She proudly handed me the picture before skipping back to her friends. "Where did all these children come from?" I whispered. Arthur lowered his voice. "Families in nearby neighborhoods. Some parents work 2 jobs. Others are rebuilding difficult lives. This place gives the children somewhere safe after school." I slowly looked around the bright room again. Nothing about it matched the stories I had heard about Damien Romano. There were no signs announcing donations. No photographs celebrating generosity. Everything had been designed for the children instead of for recognition. One of the teachers approached with a warm smile. "You must be Claire. We have heard wonderful things about you." I laughed softly. "That is impossible. I have only been here a couple of days." "Mr. Romano mentioned that you are studying nursing." I nodded. Whenever one of the little ones gets a scraped knee or a headache, he always wishes someone with medical training happened to be nearby. Before I could answer, a small boy wandered toward us rubbing his forehead after accidentally bumping into a bookshelf. I knelt beside him, gently checking the tiny red mark before handing him an ice pack wrapped in a soft towel. "You are going to be just fine," I promised. He smiled bravely before running back to finish his drawing. As I stood, I noticed someone watching quietly from outside the open doorway. Damien remained several yards away, hands in his coat pockets, making no effort to interrupt. He was not watching the children. He was watching them laugh. There was a peacefulness on his face that I had never seen before. Arthur followed my gaze and spoke so softly I almost missed his words. "Every month he pays every bill this place has without allowing his name to appear anywhere." I looked back at Damien, who turned and walked away before anyone could thank him. In that silent moment, I realized the world knew the man who owned the mansion. Almost nobody knew the man who quietly built places where children could simply feel safe. I could not stop thinking about the learning center. Every smile I had seen that morning challenged another assumption I had made about Damien Romano. By late afternoon, I found myself sitting beneath the old oak tree overlooking the gardens, turning a small watercolor painting one of the children had insisted I keep. It showed a crooked little house with blue windows and a bright yellow sun that seemed much too large for the page. At the bottom, written in uneven handwriting, were 4 simple words. "Safe people build safe places." I smiled every time I read them. Somewhere beyond the gardens, I heard the familiar sound of gravel shifting beneath approaching tires. One black SUV entered through the front gates, followed by another. The security team responded immediately, though there was no visible panic. They simply became quieter, more focused. Arthur appeared beside me carrying a cup of tea. "You have started noticing things," he observed gently. "I suppose I have." He looked toward the arriving vehicles. Life here has a rhythm. Peaceful moments are appreciated because they are never taken for granted. Before I could ask what he meant, one of Damien's senior advisors crossed the courtyard with unusually quick steps. He disappeared into the main house without acknowledging anyone. 10 minutes later, Damien emerged from the west entrance wearing a dark overcoat instead of the suit he had worn earlier. His expression had changed. The warmth I had seen around the children was gone, replaced by the calm focus of someone carrying difficult responsibilities. He noticed me immediately and walked over. "I have to leave for a meeting." I nodded. "Will you be gone long?" "I hope not." His eyes lingered on mine for a brief moment before shifting toward Arthur. "Please make sure Miss Bennet remains inside the estate until I return." I frowned. "You make it sound like I am grounded." A faint smile touched his face. "I make it sound like I worry." Before I could answer, he turned and walked toward the waiting vehicles. The convoy disappeared through the gates within seconds, leaving the mansion unusually quiet behind him. Evening settled slowly across the property. I spent an hour helping Samuel label new flower beds before returning inside as the first porch lights flickered on. Arthur was reading beside the fireplace when my new phone vibrated against the side table. The screen displayed an unknown number again. My heartbeat immediately quickened. Arthur looked up. "You do not have to answer." I hesitated before pressing the button. "Hello?" This time a woman's voice greeted me. Calm. Pleasant. Almost friendly. "Claire, I hope you are enjoying your stay." I felt the color leave my face. "Who is this?" "Someone who admires kind people." She spoke as though we were discussing the weather. "You helped a stranger." "That says wonderful things about your character." My free hand tightened around the edge of the chair. "If you know so much about me, then you know I do not want any part of this." "Oh, but you already have one." Her tone never changed. "You simply do not realize how important you have become." Arthur quietly stood and motioned for one of the nearby security officers without interrupting my conversation. "I do not know anything," I insisted. "Then perhaps you know someone." The woman paused for a moment before continuing. "Tell Mr. Romano that old promises have a way of returning." The call disconnected before I could respond. The room fell completely silent. Arthur accepted the phone from my trembling hand and immediately passed it to a technician who had arrived almost instantly. Nobody raised their voice. Nobody looked surprised. Arthur simply sighed with quiet disappointment. "They are becoming bolder." "Who are they?" I asked. Before Arthur could answer, another guard hurried into the room carrying a sealed envelope that had just been delivered to the front gate. Arthur opened it carefully. Inside rested a single white rose with no note except one handwritten sentence on a small cream-colored card. "We know she feels safe there. That can change." Arthur slowly closed the envelope, his expression more troubled than I had ever seen. At that exact moment, headlights swept across the front windows as Damien's convoy returned far earlier than expected, and the instant he stepped through the front doors, he looked directly at me, as though he already knew that whatever fragile peace we had found inside the mansion had just come to an end. The moment Damien stepped into the foyer, he noticed the envelope resting on the console table. He did not ask what had happened. He simply looked at Arthur, and the older man handed him the white rose without a word. The room became so quiet that I could hear the ticking of the antique grandfather clock near the staircase. Damien unfolded the small card, read the single sentence once, then slipped it back into the envelope with steady hands. His expression barely changed, but I recognized the same look I had seen the first morning when the security team prepared for uncertainty. Calm on the outside. Calculating every possibility underneath. "When did it arrive?" he asked. 23 minutes ago, Arthur replied. "The courier left immediately. No identifying information." Damien nodded once before turning toward me. "Did they contact you again?" I told him about the phone call, repeating every word as accurately as I could remember. He listened without interrupting, occasionally closing his eyes for a brief second as though organizing invisible pieces of a puzzle. When I finished, he remained silent long enough that I finally asked, "Do you know who they are?" He looked at the white rose resting in his hand. "I know enough to understand the message." "Then tell me." He hesitated before answering. "Someone wants me to believe that nowhere is truly safe anymore." I crossed my arms, frustration rising faster than fear. "You keep protecting me without explaining anything." His eyes met mine. "Because every explanation pulls you deeper into a life you never asked for." "I am already in it." The words echoed through the foyer. Nobody argued. Nobody denied them. Arthur quietly dismissed the staff, leaving only the three of us beneath the warm chandelier light. Damien slowly walked toward the fireplace and stared into the dancing flames. "There was a time," he said softly, "when every difficult problem in my world had a simple solution. More security. Stronger walls. Greater distance." He looked around the enormous room. "Then you arrived." I frowned. "I do not understand." "You remind everyone here that this place was built to protect people, not to isolate them." His voice carried no pride, only quiet reflection. "That changes how decisions are made." Before I could answer, one of the younger security officers entered carrying a tablet. "Sir, the phone has been traced as far as possible. Disposable device. Activated only for the calls made to Miss Bennet." Damien accepted the report with a nod before handing it back. "Double the exterior patrols tonight." The officer hesitated. "Sir, should we suspend tomorrow's children's program?" For the first time I saw genuine conflict cross Damien's face. He looked toward the window overlooking the learning center where colorful lights still glowed softly in the distance. "No," he answered firmly. "Those children will not lose one ordinary day because someone wishes to frighten us." The officer nodded and quietly left. I stared at Damien. "You are still thinking about them?" He almost looked surprised by the question. "They deserve normal childhoods." "Even now?" "Especially now." Something inside me shifted. The mansion no longer felt like a place protected by power alone. It was protected by purpose. Later that evening, I found Damien standing alone on the covered terrace overlooking the moonlit gardens. The cool autumn air carried the scent of pine and damp earth. Neither of us spoke for several moments. Finally, I stepped beside him. "I am sorry this happened because of me." He immediately shook his head. "No." His voice was gentle but certain. "This happened because you chose compassion on a rainy night." He rested his hands on the stone railing, watching the fountain shimmer beneath the moonlight. "Never apologize for kindness." I looked toward the quiet learning center where one classroom light remained on, probably forgotten after another ordinary day filled with children's laughter. "Do you ever regret stopping to help people?" I asked. Damien answered without taking his eyes off the gardens. "Every difficult chapter of my life began because I chose to protect someone." He paused before finally looking at me. "And somehow, I have never regretted a single one." At that exact moment, the security lights along the outer gardens flickered once before returning to normal, and every guard on the terrace instinctively reached for their radios at the same time, reminding both of us that even the calmest nights inside the estate could change in the space of a single heartbeat. I barely slept after the lights flickered. Every unexpected sound pulled me awake, and every shadow stretching across the bedroom walls reminded me that my ordinary life now felt impossibly far away. Just after sunrise, I wandered downstairs hoping a walk through the gardens would quiet my thoughts, but instead I found Damien already sitting alone in the library. A mug of untouched coffee rested beside several closed folders, and the morning sunlight illuminated dust floating lazily through the air. He looked as though he had never gone to bed. "You should be sleeping," I said softly. He looked up and offered the faintest smile. "You sound like Arthur." "Maybe Arthur is right." I stepped farther into the room and noticed a chessboard resting between two leather chairs. Half the pieces were arranged in the middle of a game that no one had finished. "Do you play?" I asked. "Sometimes." He motioned toward the empty chair across from him. "Sit." I hesitated before taking the seat. For several quiet minutes, neither of us moved a piece. We simply studied the board. Finally, Damien slid one white pawn forward exactly one square. "My father taught me that opening move." I answered by moving one of the black pawns. "My grandfather taught me to never underestimate simple moves." He nodded with quiet approval. Wise man. The conversation drifted naturally after that. We spoke about books, old neighborhoods, favorite seasons, and childhood memories that had nothing to do with fear or security. For the first time since arriving, I almost forgot why I was there. Then my eyes settled on an old framed photograph sitting on the bookshelf beside him. A younger Damien stood next to an elegant couple in front of the mansion. They were smiling. Truly smiling. I picked up the frame carefully. "Your parents?" His expression softened. "Yes." I returned the photograph gently to its place. "They look happy." They believed a home should never feel larger than the people inside it. His voice became quieter. "I have spent years trying to remember that." The words lingered between us. After a long silence, I finally asked the question that had lived in my mind since the first phone call. "Why did they choose me?" Damien leaned back slowly, his gaze fixed on the chessboard instead of me. "Because they think you saw something that night." But I did not. "I know." He looked at me with complete certainty. "I have reviewed every report, every camera angle, every witness statement." "You know nothing." I frowned. "Then why keep pretending I am important?" His answer came without hesitation. "Because they do not know that." I stared at him, trying to understand. He continued quietly. "The people contacting you believe you might remember details that could affect decisions far larger than either of us. They believe time and pressure will eventually reveal something. But there is nothing to reveal." "Exactly." He folded his hands together. "That is the tragedy." I felt an unexpected wave of sadness. "So I became part of this because I stopped to help someone in the rain." "Yes." His voice carried unmistakable regret. "If another driver had stopped instead of you, they would be sitting in this chair today." I lowered my eyes to the chessboard. "Do you ever wish I had kept driving?" The question hung heavily in the quiet library. Damien did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached forward and gently moved one of the knights across the board. "There are moments when I wish you had been spared all of this." He looked directly into my eyes. "But I will never wish you had become someone who ignored a person asking for help." My chest tightened. Every fear I had carried since arriving suddenly felt different. This was never about secrets hidden inside my mind. It was about assumptions made by people who had already decided what they wanted to believe. Before either of us spoke again, Arthur entered carrying a neatly folded newspaper. His usually calm expression had disappeared. Without saying a word, he placed the paper on the table. Across the front page was a large photograph taken only yesterday afternoon. It showed me standing beside Samuel in the gardens, smiling while helping arrange flower pots inside the estate. I could not take my eyes off the newspaper. The photograph filled nearly half the front page, capturing nothing more dangerous than an ordinary moment. Samuel was smiling while holding a small watering can. I was kneeling beside a row of newly planted roses with dirt on my hands and a laugh frozen across my face. It should have been the kind of picture nobody noticed. Instead, it had become proof that I was inside Damien Romano's private world. "Who took this?" I asked quietly. Arthur folded the newspaper before anyone else in the room could study it longer. "We do not know yet." Damien stood and walked toward the tall library windows. Morning sunlight spilled across the gardens where everything appeared exactly as peaceful as it had yesterday. Birds still circled above the fountain. Samuel was already trimming hedges. Nothing outside suggested that anything had changed. Yet everything had. "This was not meant for the public," Damien said. "Someone wanted us to see it." I looked at him. "To remind us they are watching." He nodded once. "Exactly." The realization settled heavily inside me. I had spent days believing I was the one being protected. Now I understood that everyone inside the mansion had quietly become part of the same burden. The gardeners. The teachers. Arthur. Even the children at the learning center. My voice became almost a whisper. "I cannot keep bringing this into your home." Damien turned toward me so quickly that I barely finished speaking. "You are not bringing anything here." But if I had never stopped that night. "Claire." His voice was calm, but it carried enough certainty to stop every doubt racing through my mind. "Kindness did not create this situation. It simply revealed people who were already willing to exploit it." Silence settled over the room again. Arthur gently excused himself, leaving us alone beside the fireplace. I slowly walked toward the photograph of Damien's parents that still rested on the bookshelf. Their smiles seemed different now. Less like a memory and more like a quiet reminder. "You once told me this house was built for a family," I said. "Yes." "Then why does everyone here treat each other like one except you?" He looked genuinely surprised. "What do you mean?" "Samuel talks about flowers like they are grandchildren. Arthur worries whether everyone has eaten. The teachers know every child's favorite storybook. Even the security guards smile when the children wave at them." I looked directly at him. "You built a place where people belong, but you still stand outside of it." He remained completely still. I continued before losing the courage to say it. "You carry every responsibility by yourself because you think that is what strength looks like." A long breath escaped him. "Sometimes it is." I shook my head gently. "Sometimes strength is letting people carry part of the weight." His eyes drifted toward the photograph of his parents before returning to me. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then something unexpected happened. Damien smiled. Not the careful, restrained smile I had seen before, but one filled with quiet gratitude. "You know," he said softly, "everyone here is usually afraid to disagree with me. I am beginning to notice. You never seem to be." I laughed. "I work with patience. They teach you that honesty is kinder than silence." Before he could answer, laughter echoed through the open library doors. Several children from the learning center were crossing the courtyard with their teachers, each carrying colorful paper lanterns they had made for an autumn celebration scheduled that evening. One little boy spotted me through the window and waved both hands enthusiastically. Without thinking, I waved back. Damien watched the exchange in thoughtful silence. "They have been asking whether you will join them tonight," he admitted. "I did not realize they even remembered my name." "They remember how you listened." He looked toward the courtyard where the children continued laughing beneath the bright blue sky. Adults often underestimate how much that matters. I felt something inside me settle for the first time since the rainy night that had changed everything. Fear was still there. Uncertainty had not disappeared. But neither had hope. I looked at Damien and smiled. "Then I think I would like to stay for the celebration." Before he could answer, one of the children suddenly ran toward the mansion carrying a folded piece of paper with Claire written carefully across the front, saying someone outside the estate had asked that it be delivered only to me. The little boy smiled proudly as he handed me the folded paper, completely unaware of the sudden silence that swept across the courtyard. Damien reached me in only a few calm steps, not out of panic but out of quiet caution. "May I?" he asked. I nodded and handed him the note. He unfolded it carefully. There were only 2 handwritten sentences. "We wanted to know whether kindness could survive inside these walls. Now we have our answer." There was no signature. No threat. Nothing else. Damien read the words again before slowly folding the paper. For the first time since I had met him, the tension in his shoulders eased instead of tightening. Arthur looked from the note to Damien with a puzzled expression. "That is all?" Damien nodded. "That is all." I frowned. "I do not understand." He looked toward the children gathering colorful lanterns across the lawn. "Neither do I completely. But whoever has been watching us no longer needs an answer." The celebration continued as the afternoon faded into evening. Hundreds of tiny lights were strung through the oak trees, filling the gardens with a warm golden glow that reflected across the fountain. Families from nearby neighborhoods arrived carrying homemade desserts while children laughed as they raced between the flower beds Samuel had spent decades caring for. Nobody looked at Damien with fear. They greeted him with grateful smiles, friendly waves, and quiet conversations that felt wonderfully ordinary. I watched him kneel to help a little girl relight the candle inside her paper lantern after the breeze blew it out. She hugged him without hesitation before running back to her friends. He simply smiled and watched her go. Standing beside me, Arthur whispered, "That happens more often than he admits." I laughed softly. "I believe it." As the sky turned deep blue, music drifted through the gardens. Someone invited Samuel to dance with his granddaughter while teachers helped children hang painted lanterns from low branches. I looked around at the people filling every corner of the estate. Just days earlier, I had believed this mansion existed only because of power. Now I understood it endured because of people who quietly cared for one another. Damien joined me beside the fountain where the water reflected dozens of floating lights. "You were right," he said. "About what?" "A house becomes a home because of the people inside it." I smiled. "I only reminded you of something you already knew." He reached into his coat pocket and held out a familiar leather key holder. "Your car keys." I stared at them in surprise. "You are letting me leave?" "I am giving you the choice I should have given you without fear." He placed the keys gently into my hand. "The roads are clear. Security believes the immediate danger has passed. If you wish to return to your own life, no one here will stop you." I looked toward the open front gates beyond the gardens. They no longer seemed frightening. They simply looked like gates. Then I looked back at the people laughing beneath the lanterns, at Samuel proudly showing children how to plant spring bulbs, at Arthur making sure every family had enough hot cider, and finally at Damien standing quietly as though he expected nothing in return. I closed my fingers around the keys before slowly placing them back into his hand. "I will leave someday," I said gently. "Because everyone should eventually return home." He nodded with understanding. "I know." I smiled through eyes that suddenly felt warm. "I am just not convinced my heart has decided where home is yet." Neither of us spoke after that. We simply stood together watching dozens of glowing lanterns rise into the crisp autumn sky, each carried higher by the evening breeze until they became tiny stars above the estate. In that peaceful silence, I finally understood something that had been waiting for me since the rainy night we first met. Some people inherit beautiful houses. Others spend their lives building them. But the rarest people of all build places where frightened hearts remember how to feel safe again, and those places are never measured by walls, wealth, or gates. They are measured by the quiet courage of the people who choose kindness when the world gives them every reason not to.